The Forgotten Highway. Chapter 1. Welcome home. Emily stepped off the old stone path and onto the cracked gravel of the mansion's entrance, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and dread. The memory house stood before her like a grand, faded portrait from a forgotten era, a towering structure with ivy, clinging walls and tall, narrow windows that seemed to peer out at her with an unspoken curiosity. It had been 10 years since she last saw this place, but the memories were still vivid, yet now they felt like they belonged to someone else's life. The front door creaked open with a reluctant sound as Emily pushed it, and she was greeted by the musty scent of age and disuse. The foyer was vast, with grandeur chandeliers casting flickering shadows on the marble floor. It looked exactly as she remembered, yet everything seemed to move in slow motion, as if time had slowed down inside this house. She climbed the worn stairway, each step feeling like a step into her past, but also into an unknown future. Her breath hitched when she reached the second floor and saw her old bedroom door standing slightly ajar, like it was waiting for her to walk through and close it forever. Emily's fingers trembled as she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room looked exactly as she remembered it, except for the empty space where her bed used to be. She wandered through the empty halls, touching the walls and running her fingers over old photographs that hung in frames on the dusty wooden mantel. Each picture brought back a flood of memories, but now they felt like they were someone else's. She closed her eyes and tried to summon the warmth she once felt here, but all she could sense was coldness creeping through the cracks in the walls. As she walked deeper into the mansion, Emily noticed small inconsistencies that started to unsettle her. A painting of a smiling family that she didn't remember seeing before. An old clock on the wall that seemed to be running slow, even though it was still ticking. These strange occurrences made her question the very foundation of her memories. Was she really as familiar with this house as she thought? Or had someone else lived here and built these false memories in her mind? The thought sent a shiver down her spine, making her feel like an intruder in her own past. She turned a corner and found herself standing in front of a closed door that seemed to have appeared out of thin air. Her heart raced as she took a deep breath and reached for the doorknob, feeling certain that this hidden room would hold the answers she desperately needed. But what if the answers were even more frightening than her questions? Chapter 2. The Photos. Emily's fingers shook as she turned the cold iron doorknob and pushed open a heavy wooden door. She found herself in a narrow corridor that led to the attic stairs. Her heart pounded in her chest as she ascended the creaking steps, each step feeling like it was bringing her closer to the truth or to something far more sinister. At the top of the stairs, a small, dusty room awaited her. The air was thick with age and neglect, and dust particles floated lazily in the dim light that filtered through the cracked attic window. The room was filled with old furniture and trunks stacked against the walls, but in the middle stood a wooden table covered with a pile of family photographs and letters. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she approached the table, her eyes scanning the familiar faces. Yes, something was off. The smiles on their faces seemed too bright, almost unreal. She picked up an old photograph that showed a family gathered around a Christmas tree, but the woman who looked exactly like her wasn't holding a gift. Instead, she was clutching a small child in her arms, and it wasn't Emily, her name was Elizabeth. Her heart sank as she continued to sift through the photographs, finding more images of this mysterious girl with the same family, yet she had no memory of ever knowing her. The more she looked at the pictures, the more unsettling they became, showing her an alternate past that felt increasingly real despite the lack of any recollection. Emily's eyes widened as she opened a stack of letters written to dear Elizabeth. Each letter described events and experiences that seemed incredibly personal, yet they were not her memories. One letter spoke of late-night conversations in the garden, another mentioned long summer days spent at the beach, and one even detailed a terrifying encounter with a mysterious figure lurking in the woods. As she read these letters, Emily felt a growing sense of dread, as if someone else's life was being intruded upon by an unwelcome guest. She flipped through the pages faster, desperate to find some clue that might explain this bizarre reality, but each letter only deepened her confusion and unease. Suddenly, Emily's eyes caught on a small, leather-bound journal lying open on the table. She picked it up carefully and opened it to reveal page after page filled with entries written in an elegant hand. The entries were like diary excerpts, detailing emotions and experiences that were intensely personal yet completely alien to her. Reading about someone else's fears, hopes, and dreams was disconcerting enough, but what truly terrified Emily was the realization that these feelings and memories belonged to a girl who lived here, a girl with a name, Elizabeth. The more she read, the more it felt like she was peering into another life, one that seemed far more real than her own. Her mind swelled in confusion, torn between disbelief and an unsettling sense of familiarity. How could someone else's memories be so vividly etched into her consciousness? And what had really happened to her during those 10 years away from the memory house? The questions weighed heavily on her as she closed the journal with a trembling hand, knowing that this hidden room was just the beginning of the truth she needed to uncover. But with each step closer to the answers, Emily felt an increasing fear that the final revelation would be more terrifying than anything she could have ever imagined. Chapter 3. The Door. Emily's pulse quickened as she descended the creaking stairs from the attic back into the dimly lit mansion below. She felt a growing sense of urgency to find the answers that had deluded her for so long, but also a deepening fear that the truth might be more horrifying than she could bear. Her footsteps echoed through the empty halls as she made her way towards the basement stairs, where an old, dusty door caught her eye. It was a door she hadn't noticed before, had never seen it at all during her childhood visits to the memory house. Her curiosity and fear waged a silent battle within her as she approached the door and reached for the handle, turning it slowly with trembling hands. The door opened with an eerie creak, revealing a dark basement filled with shadows that seemed to dance on the walls. A cold draft swept through the basement as Emily stepped inside, her eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light. The room was vast, but it felt like it had been abandoned for decades. Row upon row of old wooden shelves lined the walls, each holding various forgotten items, old books, broken toys, dusty boxes. In the center of the room stood an odd arrangement, a large, round table surrounded by an array of antiquated equipment and instruments that looked both strange and out of place in such a dilapidated setting. Emily's eyes widened as she noticed something else. The walls were covered with strange symbols and diagrams that seemed to be related to some form of scientific experiment or procedure. Her heart raced as she approached the table, her fingers brushing against the dust-covered surface as she examined the various objects on it. Among them was a small, ornate box with intricate engravings that looked almost like ancient hieroglyphs. She reached out and opened the box to reveal a collection of old photographs, each one more disturbing than the last. They showed scenes of bizarre experiments taking place in the very room she stood in now, a chilling reminder that this was no ordinary basement. Her breath caught in her throat as she picked up one photograph after another, each one revealing a different aspect of the terrifying truth behind the memory house. In one picture, a young girl, Elizabeth, was shown being restrained on a cold metal table with strange apparatus attached to her body. Another showed a figure that resembled a scientist or a doctor performing unspeakable experiments on her, while yet another depicted an array of bizarre and grotesque objects arranged in a sinister pattern. The more she looked at the photographs, the clearer it became that these were not just random images, they were part of a plan, a series of experiments that had something to do with Elizabeth's identity and her connection to Emily herself. As the reality of what was happening began to sink in, Emily felt a chill run down her spine, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. Her hands shook as she closed the box and stepped back from the table, her mind reeling with the implications of what she had just discovered. She turned towards the door, her feet moving on their own accord as she sought to escape the room that was now a testament to a hidden past filled with horror and deceit. But as she reached for the doorknob, something caught her eye, a small, faded inscription carved into the wooden frame of the door. She leaned closer to read it, her eyes widening in shock and disbelief as the words came into focus. The key to your identity lies within. The message was both a warning and an invitation, leaving Emily with more questions than ever before and a deepening sense of dread that she might not be able to escape the truth that lay hidden within the walls of the memory house.